Where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
It was Sunday afternoon, and my sister and I were across the street at a very good friend's house. Her name was Betty Ann Lindley, on her front room floor playing paper dolls. And we heard it on the radio.
That was in Lebanon, Oregon.
Yeah.
And then what did you do?
We all cried, and Betty Ann's mother cried, and we thought we were going to be invaded, and we went home, and of course our parents calmed us down, but everybody was frightened. It was very scary.
There you go.
We were taking an outing to the Oregon beaches on December 7th, and we were getting ready to return home about 3 o'clock in the afternoon when we're listening to the car radio. We heard the news that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, and that greatly affected our family. We were with an aunt and uncle and mother and two sisters, and father and two sisters. The uncle that was with us had a business in Salem that he sold, and he had been in the Army before, and he was one of my relatives that went into World War II as a Army captain. I had another uncle that went into the Navy. I had 5 cousins that were primarily in the Navy also.
What was your family's reaction to it?
Well, everybody was devastated and very worried that there might be attacks on the United States, and we live so close to the coast that we were concerned about that. Everybody wanted to know what can they do to contribute to the war effort, because it was 100% participation by all the family and friends and neighbors and the whole community and the whole United States got behind the war effort and contributed in what ways they could. My family was affected by World War II by the fact that my mother had never had worked out before outside of the home. My dad was working, and so they both went to work for the shipyards in Portland, which left myself and my 2 sisters to take care of the chores and animals that we had on our small farm, a lot of that. And so I milked cows, I took care of animals, and my parents left at 7:30 in the evening and got back around 9:30 to 10 o'clock the next morning, and then they slept and left again. So we saw very little of our parents because they worked in the shipyards helping with the war effort. We were affected also by items being rationed, gas being rationed. You couldn't travel. You were lucky to make a small trip once a month someplace to visit family. Otherwise, you stayed at home. We didn't have a telephone, so we didn't have much communications. Communications was by writing letters at that time. We worked on our farm to raise food and to help can and preserve the food, then share it with the rest of the family that didn't have the benefit of a farm. Question being, what was life like for other people at that time? The big effect on many of the people was the fact that we all had ration cards. Our food and clothing was all rationed, gasoline was rationed, sugar, coffee, different items that staples you had were all rationed because most of the food was going to the war effort. People lived within their means. They grew victory gardens in their front yard, backyard, any place they had soil around their house. They tried to grow food, or even have chickens to have eggs and recycle their unused foods for these chickens. But people didn't travel because they didn't have gas. They took necessary trips to and from work, and that was it. And oftentimes they didn't have enough gas to do that. They rode bicycles. Even the dairy trucks that delivered milk at that time took the motors out of the trucks and hitched horses to them. They delivered the milk with a van delivery truck pulled by horses, by a team of horses, which was quite fascinating. People rode bicycles, they walked in many ways. We walked a mile and a half to school in the country, uphill both ways. And family members in World War II, I had an uncle that was a captain in the Army that was called back into the Army. I had another uncle that went into the Navy. I had about 5 cousins that went into the Navy, and they all served in the South Pacific during the war zones, and some in the Philippines, some in the various islands, clear down to Australia. And fortunately, they all came back safe, so we were very lucky in that respect. World War II was over in 1955 or 45, 46, and in 1950, North Korea attacked South Korea, and the United States entered into the war to support South Korea. I graduated from high school in 1951 when I was 18 years old in June, and in June 9th I enlisted in the Navy because I had family that all served in the Navy. You had to register for a draft at that time when you were 18 years old, and rather than be drafted in the Army, I enlisted in the Navy. And I went through boot camp in San Diego, and I went on my first ship. Was a landing craft tank, landing ship tank that carried tanks and troops to land on amphibious beaches and attacks. I spent my first tour of duty in Korea was 10 months in Korea and Japan. I came back to the United States, and I went to electronics school in Treasure Island, on Treasure Island in San Francisco for 10 months, and I came out of there an electronics technician. Then I went aboard a troop carrying ship that carried amphibious troops for landings on beaches with small boats in the Korea and this type of thing. So I spent another 10 months in the Korean War effort on landings and so forth in Korea and support of troops at that time. In order to join the military at that time or to be drafted in the Army, many people joined the Marines or the Air Force or the Navy to avoid the drafts in the Army, because they wanted to choose their career in one of those branches of the service, and the choice was either volunteer or go in the draft in the Army. So people joined those different units. You had to be in good physical condition. I think probably the highest level of physical condition was required by the Marine Corps. They had the most rigorous training programs, and the Navy was probably next. Air Force was probably the least vigorous training that you had to have, physical-wise and health-wise. And you could join different, or you could pursue different careers within the branch of service that you were in. You could become a mechanic, you could become a welder, you could run small boats, you could become a bosun's mate, you could paint ships, chip paint. You could work in electronics, as I did, or you could work in all military bases required people to do food handling and cooking and this type of thing. So a lot of people got their starts in being chefs or cooks, if you will, for large groups by servicing in the military. You got to see different parts of the world. I got to see Japan, Korea, China, Philippines, small atoll islands in the South Pacific. Had some real fun experiences and a lot of camaraderie. And in fact, this last weekend was my birthday, and some of my old shipmates from the ship I was on called and left a message wishing me a happy birthday when I wasn't home here this day. So there's still camaraderie amongst members that you met and worked with on the ships and in the services before. So that's a real happy thing. During my Navy career of 1951 through 1955, I served on two amphibious naval ships. The first one was called a landing ship tank, an LST number 1048. This was one that had a huge landing a deck inside the central portion of the ship that carried tanks and amphibious landing equipment and had huge bow doors. They ran up onto the beach, opened the bow doors, and dropped a ramp, and the troops and equipment was ran off onto the beach for attacking the enemy positions. The second ship I was on was a troop carrier landing ship that was called an APA 201, the USS Menard, and this had many small boats that they loaded troops into that made amphibious landings on the beachheads in North Korea. This particular ship, we were on our way to Hong Kong for a rest and recreation visit for 10 days for the troops after having been in a war zone for a period of time. And we got a message to proceed to Saigon. The French, who occupied Saigon for many years, was just defeated in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, which was North Vietnam attacking the French and driving them out of Saigon. We went to Saigon and then went to North Vietnam and to evacuate refugees from North Vietnam. There was no war started at that time. This was before the Vietnam War. And we loaded over 2,000 Vietnamese refugees onto our ship and carried them down to Saigon and offloaded them. We made the first trip into Saigon as an American ship. We made the first American ship to go north Saigon and load up refugees. We made several trips of this nature. It was quite an exciting mission to be on, and got a lot of exposure. Had a friend that took a lot of photographs of this, and it was very exciting to be a part of that.